Welcome back to part 2 of my interview with Mike Knight, the radio legend. Here, 3 more questions if that's okay.
Not a problem. Ask away.
Okay, Mike. That's okay with you, Mike. Good question 4. What song reminds you of the radio?
Oh, what song reminds me of the radio? I think I'll answer that in telling you a little story. A friend of mine, who's now sadly no longer with us, and I were having that conversation of what song to use sums up radio. And I said, well, actually, the song that I want playing, without being too dark on this, is that I would like to have played at my funeral, was Dobie Gray and Drift Away. And my friend Bob came back a couple of months later from the USA, and he bought me the 45 vinyl copy of Dobie Gray and Drift Away, which he'd had put in a special, he'd had it mounted into a glass-fronted display. And underneath it was, "In case of death, break glass," so that I'd got the record there to play. And I've still got that somewhere. So, yeah, Dobie Gray and Drift Away would be my favorite record.
That's a good song, and also the song that reminds me of the radio is Video Killed the Radio Star.
Well, that's kind of true, but it's also it also made a lot of the radio stars, because when the guys that were doing the radio programs were doing the Top of the Pops program, and they were getting to appear on Top of the Pops, the television exposure, so video exposure that they were all getting from being on the television made them even bigger stars. So it kind of made a lot of radio stars as well. Yeah, the double-edged sword, that one.
And also, what do you think about the Kate Bush song that's nearly just over 40 or so years old, that's back in the charts?
It's an incredible song. It always has been. But what a nice thing to have happen for Kate, for it to appear in a TV program. And I watched that little bit where they're looking for the cassettes to try and find the favorite piece of music, and out comes Kate Bush. I thought, oh, wow. And for that shows you the power of television, for that to be able to pull that song up not from obscurity, it's still being played a lot these days, but to put it up where it goes to #1 is just phenomenal.
Did it ever get played on Luxie?
Yes, of course. Kate Bush got played a lot.
I bet Elvis got played a lot, and I saw a legendary musician the other day on the telly, Mike Batt.
Yeah.
If you know who that is.
Oh yes, I know who Mike Batt is. But a lot of these stars that had music played on Luxembourg. I mean, Luxembourg was the first place that ever played a Beatles record. I mean, Tony Prince will have told you the story about his copy of one of the Beatles records. But the Beatles first heard their music on the radio on Radio Luxembourg, and that can be said for a lot of stars. It's not just the Beatles. Radio Luxembourg introduced a lot of new artists at the time to the scene. So they were breaking new bands.
Yeah, brilliant. Question 5 now. What is your greatest achievement in your career so far?
I think that was working for Radio Luxembourg. The only reason I left that job, I would have loved to have kept doing that job till the day I retired. But unfortunately, it was not to be, because Radio Luxembourg's audience figures were beginning to tumble with the competition in the United Kingdom from local radio and FM with wonderful clean stereo signals. So I stayed with Luxembourg until almost the end. I left at the end. There kind of were 2 closures for Radio Luxembourg. There was the 1991 closure when the medium wave transmitter was turned off. And that for me was the true end of Radio Luxembourg. And then it continued for another year on the satellite, and towards the very end, a little bit on internet, I think. But I left at the end of the medium wave period. Very sad to leave. I tell you, I would have stayed there. Working for Radio Luxembourg was a dream come true. Absolutely wonderful. I met some great people there, some wonderful disc jockeys, and a lot of stars, people that you just bump into. And most of them are just really normal, nice people. I mean, I can quote you there, Kylie Minogue, for example. Tiny lady. Well, you don't realize that she's actually really not tall. I'm 6 foot and a big fella. And next to me, Kylie looked like a very slim, very attractive lady, but absolutely charming, lovely. No airs and graces to her at all. No edge. She was just completely normal.
One of my previous guests actually met the legendary George Michael at Capital Radio once.
Yes, I never met George, but again, as the you always read the backstory to what people do for other people, and George Michael is one of those that has done an awful lot for other people. I've never met him, but I know of him and I know of his history. Good guy.
And he also did a lot for charity. That's why he used to go into the Capital Radio building quite a lot with, I think it was Dr. Fox, I think, that he went on with.
Yeah.
And he used to talk about his charity work he used to do for the Capital charity, because he used to raise a lot of money. And one of my previous guests actually said he's one of the most down-to-earth guys you'll ever meet, George Michael.
That's what I've heard exactly the same as you've been told. But most of them are. I think in all the years that I was meeting big name stars, and I include the disc jockeys in that, because the Radio Luxembourg guys were classed as stars at the time they were doing the radio programs. Not all were perfect. Not all were nice. But the big majority were and remain so. I'd like to think that I have kept most of the people that I've met in this industry as friends.
Yeah, before we go on to question 6 and the wrap up, so keep question 6 as easy as possible, because time, you know. And also, I heard a store thingy as well that what's his I should really add you to the 208 chart group if you're in it, or if you're not in it already, or if you are in it.
I'm in that many Facebook groups now, Ben. I can't remember which ones I am or I am not in. I would more than likely be in, because I actually run a Radio Luxembourg fans group. So anybody that's interested in Radio Luxembourg can go and chat about Radio Luxembourg things there. Yeah. And we've got a lot of the old Radio Luxembourg guys that actually join in and will give you good answers.
Anyway, my last question on the list is, what advice would you give to the next generation of broadcasters who are starting out?
These days, it is insanely difficult to get into radio broadcasting and make any money from it. Even Sunshine Radio Online, with none of the guys that are on air get paid for what they do. They all do it for the love of doing radio programs. I used to get asked that same question even when I worked at Radio Luxembourg, and there is no perfect answer to it at all. There is no perfect advice that you can give to somebody and say, well, if you follow this advice, you will get into radio. The only thing I used to say to everybody then, and it was easier to get into radio then than it is now, is the same advice, if you will, that I would give now. And that is, if you want to get into radio, you will find from your own efforts and from your own work and the things that you do, you'll find a way to get into radio. And when you get into radio, please contact me back and tell me how you got into radio, because nobody has the same path. Nobody does it in the same way. Everybody gets in from different ways of doing things. So if you involve yourself, like you're doing, then when you do these podcasts, you know, if you've got an interest in radio, do something that's related to radio and see where it takes you.
Yeah, that's it for today. Thank you for joining me today, Mike.
Thank you for having me, young man. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you to you lot out there too. Thanks for joining me. Do join me again soon for another podcast. But for now, please give it up one more time for Mr. Mike Knight. Thank you very much for watching. This will be available on my YouTube channel, my Wix in video form, wix.com website in audio form, and maybe one day, who knows, on a radio station near you. Thank you again, everyone. All that's left to say is that's a wrap, and back to the studio.